The rivalry between the Beatles and the Rolling Stones has long been one of rock music's most enduring narratives. Fueled by tabloids, fan loyalty, and contrasting public images, the two bands were often portrayed as cultural opposites. Yet behind the headlines, the relationship was far more nuanced, something George Harrison once captured with a single, cuttingly casual remark about Mick Jagger lurking in the background. The comment dates back to the late 1960s, a period when the Beatles were increasingly drawn to spirituality and Eastern philosophy. In 1967, the band traveled to Bangor, Wales to study transcendental meditation under Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. Reflecting on that moment years later, Harrison recalled that Jagger appeared at the same gathering, observing from the sidelines. Harrison described the Rolling Stones frontman as someone who was always lurking around in the background, a phrase that quickly took on a life of its own in rock folklore. On the surface, the remark sounded sharp. To some fans, it reinforced the idea that Jagger was following the Beatles' lead, arriving wherever they went, watching their next move. But Harrison's tone, by most accounts, was more wry than hostile. Rather than a direct insult, it was a dry observation about how closely the Stones paid attention to the cultural paths the Beatles were exploring. At the time, the Beatles were widely seen as trendsetters, not only in music, but in fashion, philosophy, and lifestyle. Their embrace of meditation marked a turning point in Western pop culture, and it was hardly surprising that other high-profile musicians were curious. Harrison himself was deeply committed to the spiritual journey, while Jagger's interest appeared more tentative, a difference that may have shaped Harrison's offhand critique. The media, however, rarely allowed such comments to remain subtle. British tabloids were eager to frame any interaction between the two bands as evidence of rivalry. Stories of competition sold papers, and the lurking remark fit neatly into a long-running narrative of tension between Lennon-McCartney confidence and Jagger-Richards swagger. Yet history suggests that the rivalry was more performance than reality. Members of the Beatles and the Rolling Stones socialized, collaborated, and expressed mutual respect over the years. Paul McCartney even wrote one of the Stones' early hits, I Want to Be Your Man, undercutting the idea of outright animosity. In hindsight, George Harrison's comment reads less like an attack and more like a snapshot of two bands navigating fame at its peak. It captures a moment when the Beatles were charting new territory and the rest of the rock world, including Mick Jagger, was watching closely. The lurking line endures not because of its bitterness, but because it humanizes icons who were, like everyone else, curious about what came next.